The delegates from all over the world came to our capital city to discuss. That was the COP19, so for the 19th time, the problem of climate change. The delegates come from all over the world, as today, right now in Katowice, we have nearly 200 parties from 200 places in the world. And one of them came from Philippines. One of the negotiators of the Philippines was Yep Sanyo. And he started to make a speech. And exactly in the same moment, the Typhoon Haiyan hit the Philippines. Yep stood against the conference hall and started his deep emotional speech, not knowing what's going on with his family. He still had in mind his brother, not knowing if his brother is still alive and what is he doing at all, because their city was literally cut from the world. He started his speech without even knowing how big are the damages in Tacloban and in Philippines. And that moment, he claimed the hunger strike, telling that we still can stop this madness, but we must act now. And from that moment, that man refused to take any kind of food, demanding from the world leaders to reach the more ambitious goals against the climate change. At the same moment, his brother, A.G. Sanyo, was fighting with the cataclysmic damages in the Philippines. He reclaimed 73 dead bodies of their neighbors from the ruins, and at the same time, when Yev was standing against the United Nations conference, he was working hard around the debris in the city of Tacloban. Right now, they are the members and leaders of the climate pilgrimage that came from Vatican, Italy, to Warsaw. They walked more than 1,500 kilometers from Vatican to Katowice. In 4 December, they went into Poland, and after 65 days, that just 2 days ago, they reached our city. Together with them, there was a group of fellow pilgrims from Philippines, from the Pacific countries, from US and from Europe. They all walked in the name of climate justice. So let me invite and welcome Yep Sanyo and A.G. Sanyo to the stage.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Is it still afternoon? My name is Yeb Sanyo, and thank you, Vukas, for that very gracious introduction. And all of that reminds us of 5 years ago, on top of what Joanna has already shared with us. I consider myself today as a recovering climate negotiator. And I feel uplifted with what Joanna said about those people in there who choose to be cogs in a machine and ignore the realities around the world. I am now a climate pilgrim, and in 2015 I left my negotiator job, and I've chosen to be with the people. And that's why I'm here, together with all of you, with the climate pilgrims who've walked with us all the way from Rome to Katowice.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is AG, but when I attend COPs, I'm better known as the brother of Yeb Sanyo. And like what Lucas said, I am a survivor of Super Typhoon Haiyan. I'd just like to say quickly that we actually grew up in Manila, but our relatives are there. And I met a really good friend, a fellow musician and artist in the Philippines who became a really good friend of mine. and he lives in Tacloban City. I go and visit him many times there. Um, he's the older brother of Joanna Sustento.
Yep. What was the moment when you started to, it's not a good word, work, but it's a kind of, it's not a job directly, but the work as a climate activist?
Oh, my climate activism had begun even before I became a negotiator. I have been working on climate change for more than 20 years, and my first COP was actually COP6 in The Hague, which was starkly, eerily similar to what's happening now, because in COP6, parties were actually negotiating the rule book for the Kyoto Protocol. And today, this week, these 2 weeks, parties are negotiating the rule book for the Paris Agreement. And it seems like at this stage in the negotiations, it felt the same when I was in COP6. And even before I attended the COPs, when I was young, I had a column in my science newspaper, in my high school newspaper. I was the science editor, and I wrote a lot about climate change. I just realized that when you're in high school, you write all of the stuff. And then many years after, you look at the newspaper, oh, I wrote about this. Yeah, I was writing a lot about climate change and global warming when I was young. So I'd say my climate activism goes a long, long way back.
You are in Warsaw, the COP19, yeah, is it right? 19. That was 2013. As a part of negotiations team, as I understood.
I was the head of the delegation.
The head of the delegation. And this is the moment when Typhoon Haiyan, it's also known as Yolanda, I think, hit the Philippines. I know it's a kind of hard question, but what was the feeling? I mean, you are sitting somewhere in the middle of Europe and pretty much can do nothing except watching at your phone and seeking for the information that will not come.
Yeah, when I arrived in Warsaw, which was about 4 days before the COP started, we already had warnings that a very strong typhoon was on its way to the Philippines. I did not know then that it would be towards Tacloban City, but we were warned that it would be off the charts and it was gathering more strength and that we would need to prepare. So when the typhoon hit on November 8th, which was 3 days before the opening of the COP, I was scrambling for information. And then a lot of our relatives, because I worked for government, I had the rank of a vice minister. And so my relatives felt that they could get information from me. I felt really helpless because my relatives were calling me on the phone and asking if I knew any information coming from ground zero. I had no information. Nobody had any information except for the bits and pieces of news that we got from the coverage. So it felt very, very difficult for me. And you know, we usually have meetings before the COP opens, and I couldn't concentrate on those meetings. And I was on the phone a lot with my relatives and trying to also find information from anybody I could get in touch with. But luckily, I think it was on Sunday, the day before the opening of the COP, friends and family saw AG on a news footage. He was just there at the background of the footage. And well, that gave us great relief because he obviously survived the typhoon, but we also knew that there was a lot of chaos in Tacloban City, and sometimes those situations can get very hairy. So it did not completely give me any sense of peace that he was okay. And I also knew that many of our relatives had been affected. So to speak in front of the world and speak in front of 15,000 delegates in Warsaw was very difficult for me. I had a speech prepared, but I had to go off script several times, including the time when I announced that my brother's not eating anything. I know that he has been hungry for 3 days, no food, very little water, and he's been gathering dead bodies with his own hands. And so I decided at that moment, just very spontaneously, I'm I'm not going to eat as well because I am in a very comfortable conference venue. My brother is out there trying to survive. And so I wanted to stand with him in solidarity.
AG, you were on the, well, ground zero. How the situation looked from the place where you were?
It's hard to describe, and I'm pretty sure that no one will ever understand or even imagine how it was. Joanna mentioned the mixture of dead humans and animals, and it's really like that. The moment I got out of the building where I sheltered, there were immediately scenes of the dead people. The first two bodies I saw were a mother and child together, and it was like 10 meters from the door of the building. And I was hoping to go to the Capitol to find friends from the media so that I can communicate back home, but I couldn't move 2 blocks away from the building where I was at the downtown area because trees were on top of lampposts, on top of cars, on top of trucks, and imagine the littered bodies of people. It was really, really, it's hard to describe, but you can imagine how chaotic it was just by those accounts.
It was it was completely like spontaneous moment when you were climbing the hunger strike. What was the outcome? I mean, I could imagine the faces of the well-dressed people, 1,000 well-dressed people, who came to discuss and hearing this kind of statement and the news. Maybe not directly, but from the survivor of Haiyan. What was the outcome? What was the reaction for your decision on the conference hall in Warsaw?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I have a very important clarification. I've never considered it a hunger strike. I've never called it a hunger strike. I called it a fasting for the climate. I said in that moment that I would refuse to take any food until I saw meaningful outcomes coming from the COP. I thought that it would happen in around 4 or 5 days. I ended up not eating for 14 days. But that's 14. That's the price we pay for the inaction around this world and on the issue of climate change. Outcomes, I will never individually claim credit for any outcome. I don't think it's the actions of one individual that can change all of those things. It's the actions of collective individuals working together. And I owe it to so many people who supported developing countries, especially during that time. And I'd like to believe that because of all that solidarity, both with the backdrop of Super Typhoon Haiyan and with the contributions I made, we had the international mechanism on loss and damage. But it breaks my heart to hear that at this COP, they're throwing it away.
Yeah, when you hear about the climate change, let's say here in Poland or maybe here in Europe, many people would react in a way, hey, cool, climate change is cool. I mean, it's fine that we will have warmer winters. We don't spend that much money for the central heating. And very often, or always, they are the citizens of the, let's say, global north countries that don't really face the direct problems with the changing climates. On the other hand, I remember myself personally seeing the testimonies from people from Iran, from Palestine, who already face the climate change problems. And what in this, well, here in the moment when we are sitting and talking, what really happened in the countries of the global south?
I'll offer my answers, and of course I'll let my brother AG offer his insights too, because it's very important for a survivor to weigh in on this kind of conversation around how people see climate change in different ways. Yeah, the journey that we had from Italy all the way to Poland, we've had a lot of conversations around how climate change is affecting people. And largely here in Europe, indeed, the warmer climates, and I'm sure it's temporary, the warmer climate is causing milder winters. You have to shed a few more winter clothes, and there's less trouble for people. And I hear that the wine will become better in many places in Europe. So, yeah, that is the perspective, and that is why we're here on this journey, because we want to make people understand the bigger realities of climate change. It's a matter of life and death for many people. It's not better wine for us. For us, it's people dying. It's farmers not being able to produce enough food. It's fisher folk finding it hard to catch fish because the changes in the ocean are also causing a lot of problems for fisher folk. It's about mothers and women struggling to bring water to their own homes because they have to walk farther for water sources, whether it's in Asia or in Africa or in Latin America. It's about people struggling just to get out of poverty. And of course, climate change is further amplifying poverty and decreasing our chances of becoming successful at pursuing the kind of dreams and good life that we desire and that we dream of.
I think the contrast between the global south and the global north in terms of experiencing climate change is so great that you can see that not many people from the global north, especially those who we met in Europe, know exactly what we're going through, like on a daily basis. When we talk about Super Typhoon Haiyan, that's just one event. And we have met people who have never been in a typhoon before, who have never experienced a typhoon once in their lives. And they're like senior citizens already. And I think it's always important to know that Super Typhoon Haiyan happened 5 years ago. But between then and now, we've had at least 100 storms. 100. We had to survive 100 more. And actually, on the 4th day of the aftermath of Super Typhoon Haiyan, there was one storm that came and hit Tacloban City again. And I could remember that people were out in the streets with pails and pots collecting water to drink. And when news spread that there's going to be another typhoon on the 4th day, people were panicking. But then when we learned on the radio that it was only 55 kilometers per hour, for us that's nothing. So people went out on the street. I asked some of my radio announcers to announce on radio for people to go out, bring out pots, pans, whatever they can collect water with. This is what we go through. Even the water that we need for our daily sustenance, we have to work hard for. Okay? It's a daily survival. You have mentioned about farmers. Imagine farmers, rice farmers with no rice, protesting in the provincial capital that they need rice. Okay? And the provincial capital will say, okay, we'll give you rice, come over. And then when they go there, they don't have rice. And then they protest, and the police or the military will say, oh, these are communist rebels. Let's shoot them down. And right there, in a farmer's protest, 3 people, 5 people will be killed by the governments, by state bullets. That's what we go through every day, and we're just talking about the Philippines. How about our sisters and brothers in the Pacific who are losing land? Imagine, the sea level is rising, and they're practically losing their way of lives. You have Maldives who already resigned to the fate of their country that one day they might really be gone in the map. You have Africans who don't have water and confronting civil unrest on a daily basis. Okay. That's how contrasting it is. That's how different the two worlds are.
The Haiyan is over. The Philippines are slowly coming back to its life. And after 2 years, there is another climate conference, of course, the COP21 in Paris. And this is the moment where you start your pilgrimage from Rome to Paris, across few countries of Europe. Why pilgrimage? Why the form of pilgrimage? Why this idea of walking
Yes, the Rome to Paris pilgrimage in 2015 was actually the second pilgrimage. Our first pilgrimage together with other pilgrims who are also here was in the Philippines. We walked from the kilometer zero marker in the capital of the Philippines all the way to ground zero, which is Tacloban City, the ground zero of Super Typhoon Haiyan. 1,000 kilometers over 40 days. That was our first pilgrimage. So why a pilgrimage? For us, walking is our way of translating the violence of the climate crisis into a peaceful expression of love and hope. And that's why we walk. That's why we pilgrimage. And for me, one of the ways I'd like to explain this is when we encountered a young boy in Italy asking us, why are you walking? Which is the same as your question. Why didn't you take the plane so you can get faster? Well, for us, it's important that we walk because it's our way of meeting people, connecting with everybody who needs to understand this issue better. We walk because we want to meet these people. We want to connect. We want to build a community. And for us, the pilgrimage is becoming a global movement. We come from different countries. We come from different cultures, different backgrounds, different ways of life, even different faith traditions. But we want to demonstrate that in a pilgrimage, we can stand together, unite as one human family, and demonstrate that this world could be better. And of course, as a pilgrimage, we depend on the goodness of other human beings. They give us shelter, they give us food, and they give us warmth. And for us, throughout these pilgrimages that we've done, we have proven a lot of things about the human spirit. It has given us hope, and all of these hopeful stories we will continue to tell.
What was your, what is your image of Europe from the perspective of walker? And do you remember some significant moments of that second one? I mean, from Rome, from Vatican, because you also started from Vatican, yeah? From Vatican to Paris, but also the third one, which was to Katowice.
To be honest, when we were talking about the European pilgrimage, I didn't really know what to expect. But judging from the accounts of people who we surveyed with, they were warning us of snow because Filipinos always enjoy 30-degree weather almost all year round, and for most Filipinos we have never encountered snow, especially those who don't go out of the country much. But the most striking thing is that when we were preparing for the San Bernardino Pass, which is a crossing from Italy to Switzerland, we heard a lot of scary stories about 12-foot snows, that we'll freeze to death, that we need 1,000 layers of clothes. So we prepared so much for that. But on the day that we went up the Alps, we were literally walking on the road, and the road was so visible. There was no snow actually. The snow was high up in the ridges and the mountain tops, but where we were walking, you just see frost, and it was really surprising. And people were telling us, especially in northern Italy, that year, 2015, was about 12 or 13 degrees hotter than 2014 in that area, and they're really concerned about the implications of not having snow in winter.
I'll start answering that question by recalling an incident in 2013 when I was in Warsaw. When I was in Warsaw, and I was talking with a fellow negotiator. He's from Europe. I won't say what country. But he was telling me, yeah, I want to tell you this. My wife called me, and he says, are you listening to that man from the Philippines? For me, that was very striking because that gave me two different images of Europe. One, a negotiator who was just following orders, and then his wife who was watching television, listening to my speech, and probably watching the devastation happening in the Philippines, and telling his husband on the phone, look, you have to listen to that man, to that guy. And that gave me hope because there are people in Europe who get it. And my impression of Europe is that after all of this journey, we have a lot of similarities despite our differences. And I think we can celebrate those differences because of our common aspiration for a better world. We've met a lot of good people in Europe. We're very thankful for that. We love Europe for the goodness and the love that we have received throughout our journey.
Very often, I remember your speech in Imielin, like 30 kilometers from here, just one day before you came to Katowice. And there was a quite strong moment when you started to quoting Pope Francis and his encyclic, Laudato Si. It's quite often that, well, very often in history, science and religion didn't meet that much. But this is the moment where the climate change is the point where both of them, also thanks to the encyclic, they meet exactly in the same point. Why this document is so important to you? Because I see that it's really present on your website, in your conversations, during your speeches. Why is it so important? And what is the most important outcome from Laudato Si for you?
Yes, Laudato Si is such a special gift for all of us, whether you're a Christian or not. It has a lot of messages, but its core message, for me at least, is the message of justice, where we need to see the cry of the earth as the cry of the poor. Because if we don't see the cry of the earth as the cry of the poor, we fail to understand the full reality of the ecological crisis. We might see it only as an environmental problem. No, it is deeply connected to people's lives, especially people who depend on a healthy environment, people who are struggling to make ends meet every day. So for me, Laudato Si sends us that very courageous message from Pope Francis, of course, that we need to look at this issue in the context of how unfair it all is. And the climate crisis, for me, is exactly like that. A lot of people would probably philosophically say, well, if there are no people on Earth, then the Earth will be okay. Well, it's not as simple as that. The climate crisis is a kind of problem. As we face it, it's not going to be solved soon. And while it is becoming aggravated, the poorest people on Earth are going to suffer more. And it's going to be a terrible life for people, and people are going to die. People are going to continue struggling with their lives. That is how climate change is happening in many parts of the world. And that's why I care a lot about this issue in the way that the encyclical has described it, because it is truly an issue of justice.
I will ask the same question that I asked Joanna. We are here in Katowice on the 24th conference. Can you be still optimists? Are you optimists now and here?
Yes and no. Yes, I'm optimistic about everything outside of the COP. But for the COP, I had never been a fan of the COP. I mean, if they decided 24 years ago, then my good friend might still be alive now. Okay? And maybe, I have a photo to show. Can we flash that photo to answer it quickly? Yeah. Can we show okay. This is a photo that I took in Tacloban City. I think this was on day 3. And as you can see, it's blurred. I intentionally blurred this photo because I was pretty sure that one day I'm going to look at the file and I might not be strong enough to look at it, so I intentionally blurred it. It's like a selfie of, that's myself over there at the right. I'm sitting inside the dump truck. I mean, it's a dump truck with the back lifted up, if you can see. Usually when the back of a dump truck is lifted up, simply because it's dropping some stuff like gravel or sand maybe, or rocks. We were actually dumping warm bodies. That was a batch of 27 bodies, including 4 children that we fit inside one body bag. This is actually the lowest point of my life. I mean, I never imagined even touching a dead body growing up, but to hold 73 at least of people who used to be alive like 2 hours earlier is something that would change you forever. It could also give you strength and motivation. Right that very moment, if you can see, the driver of the truck was about to cry and he was asking me, AG, are we doing the right thing? I said, why? And we're treating these bodies like rocks. I said, you know what, it's not your fault, it's not our fault, but right now we have no choice, but we have to do it. Because if we don't, then the bodies would keep on piling up on the road, and it will be harder for us to do our job, or it could cause epidemic, it could cause a lot of other problems. That's in front of the Tacloban City Hall. It's a park, it's a beautiful park, but right during the aftermath, it turned into a mass, not a grave, but it was like a dump site for the bodies. And to talk about human lives that way, like to dump them, it's not fair, it's not just. And it could have been avoided if they decided 24 years ago. So to be asked that question, if I have hope in the COP, I would have more hope in the people, and I would have more hope in giving the power back to the people, and never to a few individuals who lead different countries. We have how many? 200 world leaders. We have 90 corporations responsible. Even if you count all the board members of the board of directors of those 90 corporations, that's only a few thousand people deciding the fate of the world. And that's unfair. But we can change it. We can change the system by putting the power back to the people.
Thank you very much. Do you want to say something?
Thank you, AG. And you probably know my answer as well. As a recovering climate negotiator, I made that decision 5 years ago that I am done with that. But I would also like to say that we have hope in the countries in there who continue to fight. There are countries in there, like Pacific countries, who are standing up for what is right. And as people from civil society, we need to support them. We need to support their voices and encourage them to build that future for all of us. They have a fighting chance in there. And despite, obviously, how we feel about the COP, we need to support them. And we need people like them from these countries, from these especially vulnerable countries, who continue to believe that they can triumph over all of this adversity.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.